And we're going to get started. All right, everyone, welcome back. I hope you had a nice week off. I know you heard me chatting, and I was to New Orleans, and now I'm in Chicago, and I get to go home next week, and then we're leaving on vacation for a month. So I'm pretty excited about that. So anyway, we are here tonight with Erin, and she's going to get us started. So take it away, Erin.
Well, all right, I'll take it away. I forgot to set up the
Oh yeah, that's okay.
Keynote earlier, but that's all right. We can do that
So
now.
if anyone wants to put anything in the chat of how you've been doing and working, setting up your classroom or your home to work with your students, we'd love to hear how things are going.
Yes, definitely. And I think I've scheduled it so that we're not so pressed this week. So, we might have more time for just chatting and discussion.
Great. Wonderful.
Yeah. So but we should get going. Otherwise we'll run out of time.
That's right.
Even you have that time. So let's see here. Make sure I've got everything going right. I do. So I just wanted to look at the schedule again real fast. So today we're planning to go through chapter 4, which is where we start working with words that have adjacent consonants in them. And then we were going to start on chapter 5, which is teaching the advanced code. And I realized that there are quite a few lessons in that chapter. So we'll begin those this week, and then we'll pick it up again next week. We'll finish those off and look at multisyllable management. And then we have another week. So if we don't finish, we have some time that we could work with on March 8th, where I was planning just to give people ideas of where they might go from here once they finish the Reading Reflex book. Teachers, what they might do and how this would look in a classroom or in small group setting. Parents, things you can do just from here. So that was my plan. And since we're starting with chapter 4, I think that's good. It's going to give us a nice review of what we looked at last week, because the lessons are basically the same as the lessons in chapter 3. It's just that the words are longer, and so they're harder to segment and blend, and we need to teach children how to do that. And then chapter 5 is, as I mentioned last week, where things are going to get interesting. And we'll be learning in that chapter how to take the same speech to print approach that we've taken to the basic code and learn the rest of the code in that same approach, no changing in what we're doing. So we're going to continue exactly as we've been working with words that are the basic code, where each sound is represented by one letter. And that way that we're teaching the basic code, as we talked about in the last few sessions, is one that relies on the natural ability of humans to learn labels of the things around them. And we're going to use that rather than rule memorization, which is very difficult for some students, and then rule application, which isn't really developmentally appropriate until after age 9. And then whole word memorization to deal with all of the exceptions to the rules. So we're going to take a very different approach through it. And I think we'll have a lot of unlearning of language and habits with students too. So, but before we get into that chapter, I wanted to look at the segmenting practice that I gave you last time as homework. Let me see. We have time, a few minutes. So you could put it in the chat if anybody had any questions about segmenting the words that were on that page. It was page 63, or how you pronounce any of the sounds there. So just pipe in if you do, or put it, you can put it in the chat for us. Well, that's good that we all, I think, are getting pretty good at segmenting. I think it's something that, as you're studying the science of reading, people are learning and learning well. So that's good. But I do have to say that phonics training has confused us all about the sounds. And we're going to look at a very clear and language-driven approach to segmenting. Linguists are very clear about what the phonemes of the language are, and we'll stay strictly true to that phonemic level when we're working with students. So the words that are challenging to us, I think, on that list are, and to students too, and us, are the ones that have first adjacent consonant sounds, where you have two separate sounds that are consonants next to each other. They're just harder to pull apart. So in great, for example, the sounds are g, r, a, t. Right? In float, you have two separate consonant sounds at the beginning, f, u, o, t. In drip, you have two separate consonant sounds, and some students are going to want to say j as the first sound if you try to pull it apart. Drip, right? So we're going to teach them to segment really beautifully, and we would want to say for that one, d, r, I, p. Now, segmenting those consonants gets especially challenging when it's a vowel followed by an l or a sound. Those are really hard to pull off. And in fact, many phonics programs will train you not even to do that, just to leave those vowel, R-controlled vowels, for example, together. But in this approach, we're going to pull them all the way apart because those are separate phonemes, and we're staying true to the phonemic level that students are walking in the door with an innate knowledge of. So the challenging word for that might be separating the word bulb into b, a, u, b, right? Or star. Star is actually four sounds, four phonemes, s, t, a, r. And short is four phonemes too, sh, o, t. And teaching kids to pull those apart and put those together is challenging, and it might be challenging for some of you as well, but we'll get better and better at it as we do it. And the overlap in our code, where some of the symbols are used for separate, one sound one time and another sound another time, where they represent two or more sounds, that makes it even more confusing. So we have to pin down that segmenting first. It'll be really good to get good at that before we start delving into the dealing with that sort of thing in chapter 5.
Erin, you have the speakers, you have your slides on the side. You want to put it in full view?
Oh, it's not in full view?
Not for me.
Oh, why wouldn't it be in full view? Is that because I have the chat open and the speakers? Okay, that could be it.
Put it in presentation mode.
Yeah, I thought it was.
I'm not seeing it. Anyone else seeing that?
I only
I
have
see
a side
speaker
view.
notes.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. And yeah, I think what I did was when I shared the Keynote rather than sharing my desktop, right?
Okay.
Which I had done before. I don't know why I did that.
It's still the same.
Right, I haven't started it yet. Let's
Oh.
see. How's that now?
There you go.
All right, sorry
You got
about that. I did the wrong sharing box.
You got it now. All
I don't think we
good.
missed anything though in the slides.
Nope.
So,
All right.
which is perfect. So I was just talking about segmenting, right? And so we're going to really work on segmenting well in this next chapter before we delve into the advanced code and have to sort out things as they get complicated. When a student is really having trouble segmenting though, I would suggest that you get a board with one of those numbered boards with the numbers along it, and stretch that word way out as you are saying the word to help them to hear each sound. So if we were trying to segment out the word bulb and they were having a terrible time, I would go bulb to help them segment that from the for example. This is a very important tool, turning segmenting into a place to listen. It makes it much easier. And I would recommend to any of you who are having a little challenge with hearing the sounds and being sure you're hearing them accurately, to rely on the coding that's in the book. Most of the lists are shown with this special coding where they mark words or they mark sounds that are more than one letter in bold. So you can tell how many sounds are supposed to be in that word. So I've just pulled out a random page, for example, and you can see that bolding that they have there. So you can look at a word and it'll show you how many sounds are there. And that I found really helpful at the beginning when I was trying to make sure that I was segmenting in the same way that they were showing in this methodology. So, all right. Now, the other homework I gave you from last time was to go give the lessons for teaching the basic code, to find a student or someone to role play with and start out in chapter 3, doing the lessons that my daughter and I had demonstrated last time. The lessons we're going to see next in chapter 4 are pretty much the same. So they're just with longer and harder words. So I would suggest that we just jump into those lessons. You watch those again. It may clear up any questions you had from teaching your student. And if not, at the end, when we have our discussion time, we can go through any questions you have or problems you had with your student. All right. So this chapter we're going to do is the one called adjacent consonant sounds. And those, this terminology is a little different. It's usually termed blends, right? Is what people call these words. But in phonographics, we're going to learn a new language for talking about words, one that's more accurate, less confusing to kids. And the term blends actually, I think, is confusing to us all. And we're going to use the term adjacent consonant sounds to be more accurate and less confusing. Because if you think about it, all sounds in spoken words are blended. Two consonants aren't any more blended than the rest of the sounds are blended. They're just harder to pull apart, that's all. So I think in changing our terminology too, we can change our approach more easily. The book has great discussions of all of this, as always. On page 154, it talks about these consonant blends and why we're going to approach them a different way from the way that it is often done in phonics programs. And one thing to keep in mind is that, wow, there are just a lot of combinations. When you add them up, there are nearly 100 possible consonant-consonant combinations. And the funny thing is about kids is if you work with something with them, then they think that they get the idea that they're supposed to remember it, right? That they're supposed to memorize that. So if you start working with these combinations all the time, then they try to remember them. And you're adding significantly to the memory load, to your visual memory, when they start trying to remember all of these. And they're adding something that's completely redundant. They don't need to learn the consonant combination BR, right? Brr. Because at this point, we've already taught them B and its symbol. We've taught them and its symbol. And we've taught them how to combine sounds. So all of this is completely redundant to get into. And then the chapter goes on to talk about word families as well. Word families are the things like where you'll read a whole list of words that rhyme. So pig, big, dig. And it just, the whole list goes like that. And then you'll do another list, maybe where the beginning sounds are the same. And those kinds of drills are done a lot in phonics programs. And when you add these into those consonant blends, oh my goodness, you are really adding to the visual memory. If you add up all the consonant vowel and vowel consonant combinations, there's about 1,000 of them. And that's just way too much to be dealing with. And again, we're looking at grossly redundant information because the students already know what the sounds are for the symbols that we're working with. And they already need to blend to get a word together anyway. So there's no reason to be working with these in isolation and giving kids the idea that they need to remember these. But there's more issues than just the redundancy there. One thing that happens is when you have kids reading lists like that a lot and drilling this way a lot, it trains them not to decode the whole word. They start to attend to the first letter because that's the only thing changing, and then just saying the rest. And they get in the habit of that. And you wouldn't think that it would get so heavy set, but it really does. The book mentions that at the Read America Clinic, when they wrote the book, the biggest misstrategy that they had with their younger students coming in, the ones who were in first grade, which would be like year 2, I think, in the UK, is reading the first letter and guessing the rest. And this is the genesis of that type of approach and misstrategy that students have. We need to train them to go left to right all the way through every time. Okay? And the other thing that the book points out about word families is that these don't match the real world at all in the way that the real world works. Kids begin to get the idea that reading, very young ones who don't have a lot of experience yet, get the idea that reading is some sort of rhyming game or something, and that it's not about constructing meaning as you go. And we don't want to get them off in that realm at all. So, oh, that's my daughter coming in with her new puppy she got yesterday. She'll wait though until it's time to demonstrate lessons. Okay, so the point of all of this is that we won't be wasting precious visual memory on redundant, arbitrary chunks within words. And there's no need to do so. There's no new information, but the skills involved here in blending and segmenting these sounds are more difficult. So that is what we're going to focus our instruction upon, is better skills here, right? So our first goal with the lessons in chapter 4 will be to be able to perform the basic reading skills while articulating adjacent consonant sounds, even just speaking them, articulating them. Remember, when kids learn to speak as little babies, there's a developmental stumbling block here. For them to even be able to say 2 consonant sounds next to each other takes some time. That's why they say things like, I want a cacker, or can I have a banky, right? It's a natural stepping block, right, in the development of speech. And it's natural that when you're learning a new skill like reading, that requires some relearning, right, as this new skill is being learned too. So it can be a difficult step going from chapter 3 to chapter 4 with young kids. So allow lots of time to work up to it. And for older kids, it's very important to work through this chapter too, because of this sort of relearning that has to happen with the adjacent consonant sounds. Our next goal with the lessons you're going to see is to be able to recall all the sounds in these longer words when they're blending. We'll be going up from 3 sounds to 4 sounds in words pretty quickly. And If students are taking a long time to remember what the symbols represent, then they may not be able to recall everything by the time they get to the end. So if recognizing those sound pictures is taking a really long time, you may need to spend more time in chapter 3. Okay. And our third goal is to avoid the tendency to add sounds to words. You're going to find that a lot, especially with older kids who've been drilled in blends and word families. They're going to need a lot of retraining. It's almost like those blends get stuck together, and every time they see a letter B, they think burr, right? And so you'll have that extra sound to remove. And the lessons in this chapter are going to help you do that. But repetition is going to be the key. So as we look at the lessons, just thinking about what your day's lesson plan might be, it's a good format to start with a warm-up with some of your older lessons, just for a few minutes, get warmed up, and then move on to the newer lessons in the time that you have. And remember, in one sitting, you can do several of the lesson plans, right? I generally sort of give myself about 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes per lesson plan. And I try to sit down for an hour with kids, at least when I can. But of course, that all depends on your child and what they can manage, right? So the word lists in chapter 4, there are 3 of them, and they're sequenced from easiest to hardest. So you'll see these little lettery things around. It's just referring to the structure of the words. So the first list is made with a vowel, a consonant, and then a separate consonant sound, like elf or amp. And then the next list adds a 4th sound at the beginning. So you have consonant, vowel, consonant, consonant, like pump or milk. And then the hardest list is the one where the 2 adjacent consonants are at the very beginning, like trip or clap. So those are the word lists that we'll be working through. And as we talked about in chapter 3, you take one word list and you do all the lessons in the chapter. And as things are going well, then we do them all again with the next list, and then with the next list. Okay, so I think we're ready for some lesson demonstrations then. I'll have my daughter come on over and we'll start pulling out the lessons in the chapter. Samantha, are you ready? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Let me switch the camera view here. Here we go. Did you want to say hi, Sam? Let me see if I already switched the camera. I got to switch it back. Hi, everybody. Okay, now I will get the right camera going again. And yep, that's right. Before we go, oh yeah, here it is. So the first lesson that you'll see in the chapter is adjacent consonant phoneme manipulation. No, it's auditory processing, isn't it? Adjacent consonant auditory processing. So ignore my phoneme manipulation I wrote on there. That's from the certification kit. It's auditory processing. And the lesson is on page 160, in case you're wanting to follow along in the Reading Reflex book. I cut up the first one. Let's see if this light here helps. I cut up the first list, which starts with the word wrap. And so you remember, you're going to have a list that you're looking at, the student isn't seeing. And you're going to have a bunch of sound pictures the student is using to build words with. Okay, Sam, we're going to build some words in this time. They aren't real words. Okay. They're just native sounds, but they can be read and spelled the same way. So we'll use these. And the first word we're going to build is wrap. What's the first sound you hear in wrap?
Wrap.
Great job. All right. And if she had not said the sounds as she brought them in, I would make sure that she did. All right, let's read that one.
Wrap.
Great. Now I'm going to change one thing. So this will stay here, but you change one thing to make wrap into brap. So what sound are you bringing in?
Bap.
And you're right, we're going to need a b, and we'll need it here. But this made bap, and we wanted brap.
Oh.
So what do you think we might do?
App.
That's right.
Brap.
You were missing a sound.
I
Yeah.
didn't hear.
Yeah. Well, you were used to taking one away and putting them in. Yeah. But this one will be a little different. We might be adding them. We might be taking them away. Might be moving one. And you found it. Great job. Let's read it.
App. Brap.
You got it. Change brap to brip. What sound are you bringing in? It. Yep.
It. Brick.
You got it. Change brip to bip. Mm-hmm.
Bip.
Nice. Bip, blip. And then-
Blip.
great. They get the idea of how to do the procedure. So you don't need to lead them much after a little while. But some students you'll need to direct each time. That's bip, show me blip, right? Tell me the sounds. Okay, let's read this one.
Blip.
Great. And I'm going to keep doing this whole lesson with Sam because if some of you remember on the testing, changing sounds and words wasn't the easiest for her, right? And you remember, Samantha, you wanted to learn to do that a little better, right? So let's change blip to blop. What's that new sound?
Blop.
Beautiful. Change blop to blocked.
Blot.
Great. Blot to locked.
Lot.
Great. Lot to lost.
Lost.
Great. You do great. A student who wasn't having such an easy time, I would slow those sounds down, stretch them out. But I need to challenge her. So now I'm just giving them to her at normal spoken speed. You have lost, make it into gost. What's that new sound? Great.
Gost.
Great. Change gost to got. That's the one.
Got.
Got to glot.
Glot.
Great. Glot to lot.
Lot.
Lot to slot.
Slot.
Great. You get the idea. And I think she's doing great with this one. The next time I see her, I would plan to look for the hardest list and see if I can make it challenging for her, right? And that is adjacent consonant auditory processing. And that's the first of those lessons at this chapter. The next one is to do some word building. So let me get my list I need here. Oh, I wanted to say a note about that auditory processing lesson. It's not necessarily that version that's here in this chapter is not necessarily appropriate for really, really young kids, right? So if that's true, you could still be working at this chapter, but maybe keep doing the version that's in chapter 3 of auditory processing. You want to do that until that is quick and smooth and easy, because remember, this skill is crucial for fluency. All right, now we're going to do some word building. And I like this. The first list I'm going to do is the one that's vowel, consonant, consonants. And it is adjacent consonant word building on page 169. And I like this particular list because these are words we don't see and read every day. So it's nice for some of the older kids to work with sometimes. All right, we're going to build a few words here. We're going to build the word elm. It's a kind of tree.
Yeah, I know.
In case you didn't know.
I knew that.
She knows that, but some others don't. And it's perfectly fine to talk about the word and define it first.
Oh.
Beautiful. And she remembers what to do from last time. If she didn't remember, I would say to her, what sound do you hear here in elm?
Eh.
Go ahead and grab Ed, bring it in. Great. Ed.
Oh.
And what sound do you hear next? Oh. And what do you hear here? Beautiful. Now let's read it.
Elm. Eh. Oh. Elm.
You've got it. And I would give her a piece of paper and say, let's practice our mapping. Do you remember what mapping was?
I think so.
That's where you say each sound all by itself as you write it.
I know.
Okay? So why don't you map out elm? Let's hear it.
Oh. Elm.
All right, looks great. Let's build another one. Oh, someone said, can we meet the puppy? You want to grab the puppy up real fast? And someone said, when are the additional sounds of single phonograms taught, such as S and Z for the letter S? That's in the next chapter. That's in chapter 5. And here's the puppy. This is Bean. All right, Sandy, we'll send him down.
Okay.
And let's build another word. We're going to build the word aft. Do you know what aft means, Sam?
No clue.
No clue? It is a section of the boat. There's like fore and aft in the boat. You know how they have different terms? There's port and starboard for the sides, and there's fore and aft for the back. So let's see. What do you hear here in aft? Great. Go ahead and build it, bring it in aft. What do you hear? Great.
Aft.
So we can spell words we've never even heard of before, right? Okay, now we're practicing mapping. So say the sounds.
Aft.
You got it. You got it. And let's do one more word building so people can see it. How about a hard one to pull apart? Alp. Do you know what an alp is?
It's the mountain thing, right?
Yep, exactly. So what do you hear first in alp?
Oh. Alp.
Great. I did that because I want to make sure she's segmenting all the way through. Okay.
Oh. Alp.
Beautiful job.
Oh. Alp.
Great. And now let's map that one out. Say the sounds as you write it over there.
Oh. Alp.
Great. And I can tell from Sam's facial expressions that this feels fairly easy to her, and I haven't made any errors come up, so I would just keep going. And someone asked about the dog. Is it a Chihuahua? It's a Chihuahua Terrier mix. Okay. Next in the book, after you do that word building with your list, you go to directed reading. So on page 185, it talks about that. So you would take that list of words that you were building, and now we would practice reading them. Now, Sam, you may recognize all of these words, okay? What we're practicing is hearing a word form as you sound it out. So you can do that with a word you've never heard before, never read before, okay? So this word, let's say the sounds and listen for that word forming as you do it, okay?
Aft. aft,
Great.
act, act,
Mhm.
elf, elf, elk, elk,
Mhm.
elm, elm, alp, alp.
Okay, good stuff. This student, doesn't need to spend a lot of time here. She's going to get frustrated and want to get to things that will be harder for her, right? But Sam, remember, you're helping us practice so they can see what other students would do. Now, students who wouldn't be able to blend like that, whether this is more challenging, no, you don't need to mess up, Sam. You might ask them to do a variation that's in the book, which is on page 185. You'll see the variation there. And in that, you tell them what the word is first. You say, we're going to read this word. It's the word ask. Okay. All of a sudden, you've taken a lot of angst away from a student who's very worried about making mistakes, isn't sure how to blend, isn't sure they're doing the right thing. They know what the word is. And now they can relax and focus on what you want them to focus upon, which is blending. Learning how you can say those sounds and hear a word happen as you do it. So let me show you that with Sam, okay? We're going to read this list of words now, okay? But I'm going to be here to direct you through it, don't worry. This is the word ask. So let's read it. Let's read those sounds and hear ask happen.
Ask, ask.
Good. And make sure you say each sound all by itself so that
Oh,
they know how you're doing that. Okay, so let's read the word and.
and, and,
Let's read asp.
asp, asp,
Imp.
Imp,
Ink.
ink, ink,
Yeah, you and I say the word ink, don't you?
ink,
And I think over in England, they say it here more. So what would the word be if we say it?
ink, ink.
Ink. Yeah, it just doesn't sound right to me either. It sounds like ink to me, but over in other places. And if you were reading this for the first time, you didn't know what the word is, you might start with it, right?
Ink.
Does that sound like ink enough? If you started with it? Enough. You could kind of jump to the word, right? All right, last one. This is the word end.
End.
Beautiful. So that is the directed reading lesson. The next lesson you'll see is the spelling practice, and that is on page 193. Okay. And you use the same list from your book. You give her a piece of paper and you say, okay, we're going to do a little spelling game. We're just going to practice spelling out words from the sounds you hear in them. Okay. You may know how to spell all the words, that's fine. But I want you to think about what you hear first and say each sound and then write it as you hear it. Okay. So let's spell the word aft. Remember that about the boats. Now I need you to say the sounds out loud.
Aft. Aft.
That spells it. Beautiful job. How about the word act?
Act.
Act. Good. Now, if she is a student that I think is just a heavy memorizer and she's just trying to remember what a word looks like and has no idea how to use sounds to spell, then I would do a little scaffolding that we talked about last time in chapter 3. I would have her tell me the sounds first and then write it out. So let's do that for the word elf. It's 3 sounds. What are the sounds you hear in elf?
Apple. Elf.
So I want you to write that as you hear each one. Yeah.
Apple. Elf.
You got it. And let's do the word elk. What do you hear?
Apple.
Good. Let's
Elk.
hear that as you write it.
Elk.
Oh, one at a time.
Elk.
Oh,
Elk.
yeah. Good. And let's do one more. Elm. That kind of tree, right? What are the sounds first?
Apple.
Mhm.
Apple.
That's an elm. Very nice job. We also talked about some scaffolding to do for students, maybe who are still learning their basic code and where it would be challenging for them to remember the sound pictures that they need to write. You can, for those students, give them a list of the sounds that might be involved, right? Like say, here are some of the sound pictures we're going to use to build our words. If you're not sure, we can come over here and see if see what it looks like, right? I might think ahead, right, and make a prettier list when I do it. So we're going to spell, pretend you're a different student now who doesn't really know your sound pictures very well, like a kindergartner, okay? We're going to spell the word imp. So what are the sounds you hear in imp?
I.
Great. So what's the first sound you hear in imp?
I.
Do you know what to write for imp? If not, we can come here. Which one would you guess is I? That's right. I. Now what do you hear next in imp? I. Do you remember? Great. And what do you hear last in imp? Now pretend you don't know.
Oh.
Do you know what to write for p?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay. Let's look over here. Does one of these look like it might be p? Do you have a guess?
Is it that one?
That one's close. It does have like one of those circly things, but this one, this is.
Oh, okay.
So use that one when you finish up imp. Say the sound. Great. And let's read that.
Imp.
You've got it. All right. So that's the spelling practice. And I did want to point out that you can use that for brand new readers who are still learning their basic code sound pictures. But you might also use that same sort of idea for the students who are consistently having troubles with I versus E, for example. You could ask them to point to the one they hear first, get it right so that they're always writing the correct one first. Let's say, for example, Sam, we're going to build the word or write the word elm. What's the first sound you hear in elm?
Eh.
Great. Now, before you write it, which one of these is E? Yes, you remember right. Use that to write elm. Let's hear it. I'll just write it again. Pretend we hadn't done it. Let's hear it.
Elm.
Great.
Elm.
You could do the same sort of thing with b and d. You could put them out here and say, this is b, this is d. Our words are going to have some of those in there. So when we're ready to write one, let's choose the correct one first. It's just a good way to practice that and really be driven by the sound first and get a chance to sort out these very similar looking symbols or very similar sounding sounds. All right, and we have one more lesson in chapter 4, which is reading coded stories, or not reading coded stories, but reading stories with those sound pictures that we've been working with and with these adjacent consonant sounds. So they give you a list of words that you, or stories that you could be reading. The lesson plan for it is on page 195 for reading stories. And there's some good ideas there on how to manage the errors that come up as students make mistakes. And you'll read also there the readiness section. And in the readiness section, they mentioned that older students will probably find these stories a little silly. So you don't need to do these ones. We'll have plenty of reading to do later as we move along, right? Would you like to read it, Sam? Even though it might be a little silly? All right, but we're going to work on reading accurately. Okay, so take your time and sound out whenever you need to. Okay, go ahead.
Stan did plant a nut. It went pop up from its pot, and it did not stop. His nut went bump. It must stop. Stan had to cut and cut to get his nut to stop. It's a log, and his desk, and a desk, and a stump.
Cute.
That's a good story.
Yeah. And you can see she didn't really need that practice, but a student who's still learning sound pictures, this could be done to help with that. So those are the lessons in chapter 4. Samantha, you can have a little break, but I still do need you for the next chapter, okay? But if you need to go, I can text you when it's close. Probably half hour or less, 15 minutes maybe. Thank you, Sam. So let me change now back to this camera. Okay, there we go. And those were the lessons in chapter 4. As you can see, they're very similar to what's in chapter 3. And we'll have time at the end for questions and answers about how those lessons went and what you can do this next week for that chapter. But in the meantime, let's go on and talk about when you finished up with that chapter or done those lessons, there are a couple of supplements you might like that are in the online store. Remember last time we talked about Fun in the Sun? It has those same stories that are in the Reading Reflex book, but they have been updated and they're in color. So Stan's Nut, for example, that she just read is in here in a real book form, so it feels more like a book. Well, it feels more like a book because it is a book. And you'll find the second half of the book are all the adjacent consonant stories. And your assignment for next week is going to be to take your child through all the lessons in this chapter using that same word list that I was using with Samantha, at least. You can go further, anytime go further, but try to get to that for next week. And remember, you're going to do this chapter if it's appropriate. So if you have a very young student who's still learning those basic code sound pictures, still learning to blend and segment 3 sounds in simple words like in chapter 3, well, then you want to keep working with that and get to this when they're ready. And you can follow those readiness directions that are at the top of every lesson plan. But what you can do then is ask someone to role play a child for you so that you can go through these lessons in this chapter and know that you're comfortable and you'll be ready to do them when your child's ready, while you have us here to bounce off with and ask questions. And recall, we talked last time about a rule of thumb of about 80%. When a student has about 80% of the sound pictures down, then it might be time to move on, right? You don't want to wait for 100% mastery. That's not a good lesson plan. But if they're not quite at 80%, maybe you want to repeat for a little bit before you move on. And when you move on, you will move on to the next word list, do the same lessons. And since your assignment is to take students through all those lessons, of course, you're going to need to be cutting up the materials that you saw me using that are there in the book. And I forgot to mention last time that teachers out there who are thinking about perhaps doing the training, you don't want to spend a ton of time creating and organizing the materials that are in the Reading Reflex book, because your certification kit is going to have these materials too. And it has it in durable cardstock, ready to use with students, and in color with pretty pictures. So the word building for pink, for example, looks like this in the certification kit. And you have the word all ready to build and a colored picture, right? Colored photograph that goes with it. So here's a mop and a map and top and cop. So I'm just saying, if you're thinking about doing the training, I wouldn't spend a lot of time creating really nice things from the Reading Reflex book. You'll have a whole kit all organized with the word building you'll need and word lists and things all ready to go. All right, now let me get my list here. And another supplement I might mention that you can find there in the store if you need it is a card game. Remember, there was a card game that matched up to chapter 3. There's one that matches up to chapter 4, working with the adjacent consonant sounds. It's called My Turn. It's fun. It would be great if you need to spend a lot of time practicing before moving on from this chapter, or if you just want a fun way to review things after you have moved on. Okay. And the last supplement I wanted to mention that you might be interested in at this level is the list of Dulch words that's been coded phonographically. Now, I think in the science of reading, the terminology that people are using now for this coding that phonographic started a long time ago is orthographic mapping, right? So this is the Dulch list mapped out by sounds. So every sound is separated and ready to be read. And if you need to spend a lot of time working with the basic code in chapters 3 and 4, but your school is pushing for a lot of sight word work, then I would suggest you grab one of these. It's inexpensive. It's a downloadable PDF. And you can use these words to simply read by sound in the same way that we've been reading by sounds with the other words. I would do it in that directed version that we were talking about of the directed reading, where you tell them what the word is and then just direct them through saying the sounds. So if we do that with the word away, for example, I would point to each sound as we said it. I said, we're going to read the word away. Everybody read it with me. W, a, away. Great. Or if it's just my child, you'd say, here are a lot of words that you guys have to read in class and in the books. So let's just practice reading them correctly, reading them by the sounds. Let's read this word. This word is the word away. So say the sounds with me. W, a, away. Now, if you decide you're not going to tell the student, your child, what the word is first, you're going to let them try to blend it. Just be ready to tell them what the sound pictures are if they don't recognize them. So if they're looking at this word blue, for example, and they don't know what to say right here, or they say the wrong thing right here, all you have to do is point to it, point to the entire thing, right? And tell them what to say. Say ooh here. That's what they're going to have to do to read the word blue correctly, right? Say ooh here. Let's say it. Ooh, blue. So that means we, as reading teachers for our children, right, are going to need to be good at segmenting the sounds and figuring out what sounds these are. So I thought we could just practice for a few minutes with that. So here's the word brown, of course, and many students are not going to recognize this one and what to say for it. So I want you to think for a second what sound this is, and we're just going to tell the kid what sound to say right there, right? We're going to say, have you got the sound? Say ow here. Then they can read brown, right? We don't need to say anything more. Think about this one right here that's represented by a sound picture that's separated. And we'll learn how to teach kids about these separated pictures. But for now, if a kid's going to read it, what do they have to say here? It's the word come. So what do we hear? Come. It's a. So we will say to them, say here. What are we going to have to tell them if they don't know what to say there? Think about it for a second. Okay. We will tell them, say ow here. What about this one? What are we going to tell them to say here to get it read correctly? We will tell them, say I here. This is the word funny. What do we have to tell them to say here to get it read correctly? Say E here. They don't know this one. In the word go, we would tell them say O here. So they don't know this one. In help, we would have to tell them say here. Let's say they're trying to read the word hens and they're saying s, right? Getting hence. We could tell them all kinds of things, but if they're going to read it correctly, they need to say z there, don't they? Oops, sorry. So we will tell them, say z here, and they'll get the word hens. I'm hoping that's make a little sense, and if not, we can practice together more. Now, in the next chapter is where we're going to teach all of this sequentially, okay? But this mixed up exposure is great and nothing to avoid. The children are seeing all this stuff in the print around them, and they're frustrated because it's not knowable to them. So when you do this and you take them through these things, even though it's not in a sequential way yet, you're showing them that it is completely knowable. And you can remind them that we'll be going through all of this and learning all these new pictures, right? But you can help them through these sight words that your school is sending home and providing them with something really good, which is some exposure to the things that are to come. And importantly, we should remember that we humans actually learn the names of the things we encounter around us easily. We're hardwired to do that. So let your child encounter the entire code. Just be ready to tell them what to say, right? For the sound pictures. Now let's look at how we can teach them this systematically, right? And in an organized way. So in chapter 5, that's where we're going to start dealing with all of this. We're going to help your child understand that sound pictures can be more than one letter and understand the many ways that sounds can be represented. This is what we mean by the advanced code. Anything that's not just one sound, one letter, and the most expected thing you would have for that sound or that letter. You and your child should continue to approach the words in this chapter in the exact same way we've been doing the other ones. Scanning left to right, matching visual symbols to auditory sounds and nothing else, right? Blending discrete sounds into words to read and segmenting sounds to spell. Now they just need to understand the advanced code, right? Now, why do we need this so much? By 4th grade, which is year 5, I think in the UK, and this is the point where at the time of the writing of Reading Reflex, they found 40% of American students were falling below basic competency, right? By this time, 60% of the written words your child is exposed to will contain sounds represented by the advanced code, 60% of them. So they definitely need to have good understanding and mastery of this. So our first goal with this next chapter, chapter 5, is going to be their ability to understand that sometimes 2 or more letters represent a sound. So for example, in the word ship, the very first phoneme is sh, and it's represented by 2 separate letters, right? That's our first goal, is for them to understand this. It's a fairly simple concept, but it can be difficult for young kids, and it can require explicit instruction. Don't assume your child will make the cognitive leap from the basic code where everything was 1-to-1, one sound, one letter, to the advanced code where it's going to be one sound, 2 or more letters, right? see here. We are. We're going to help them understand this, though, using the right logic. And when we do it, they can make this cognitive switch, right? Remember when we met the first time, I talked about this, and that kids actually have a pretty easy time with the logic required to work with this in a sound to print approach. They already build their art with multiple shapes, right? So this is a square and this is a triangle, but they build art like houses out of those pieces, right? So they have no trouble with this logic whatsoever. And we just need to show them how the same logic applies to the written code. And the lessons are laid out to do that very carefully. Oops, I skipped one. Our second goal is their ability to understand that most sounds can be represented in more than one way. The sound A can be spelled in several ways, for example. It looks like this in train. Something else is used for A in play, and something else is used for A in paper. Right? All these variations evolved over time and space. We can trace the cultural influences through these etymological markers. It's fascinating to us linguists and people who love history, but it isn't necessary for learning to read. They don't need to know that the n shown in the word night came from the Germanic language, right? What is necessary is that they learn the various spellings for the various sounds. That requires no background, but it does require a lot of repetition. And in addition to these lessons, your child needs to be reading every day with you too, with you there offering code support. Okay? Seeing this code and knowing what you telling them what sound this one represents and what sound that represents, right? But we're going to focus on learning the symbols, not learning why each one is the way that it is. And we're going to provide a system for organizing it all. Okay. Oh, I wanted to back up to this point. This is an important one. I think we often get sidetracked wanting to explain why it is the way that it is. Kids too, at some point, when they start encountering all of this and looking at it, they sort of throw up their hands and say, why is it this way, right? And the simple answer is it's an ancient code. It was invented long ago. It's just our job to learn how it works and to learn the symbols. That's all. And if we can do that, then we can read them and put our focus where it really needs to be. And of course, we need to provide them a system with organizing all of this, right? It's complex. And if you don't give them a way to organize all this information, they can't possibly understand and retain the new information. We're going to organize it all by sound and then by the pictures of those sounds. And when you do that, your child will come to learn all those sound pictures just in doing the organization. And that although that there is variation in the way our sounds are shown, it is predictable. So you'll see the organization that we're going to be teaching to the child on page 206, if you want to look at that. But we'll see it in a few minutes as we look at the mapping and sorting lesson. But before we do that, let's look at our last goal at this chapter, which is the ability to understand that there's something called overlap in the code. Some of the components of this code can represent more than one sound. So this letter, for example, can spell aw in the word hot or ow, right? No, is it ow? So I got to move this. I can't see because I've got the gallery. Oh, I wrote the wrong thing. That should say O. This is a typo. This should say O, right? So this letter can spell A as in hot or O as in most. And we have a lot of these components that can represent more than one sound. So kids are going to need to understand this, right? And they're going to need a strategy for managing it. We went over that quite a bit in the first installment. So you might look back at that if we're going through any of these concepts too quickly. The strategy, remember, that we teach is to simply try the possibilities. So first, they need to know the possibilities, right? So we'll need to teach them that. And then second, they need to learn to try those possibilities when they encounter a word they don't know. So those are our goals in this chapter. Children are quite capable, though, of understanding overlap, as long as they are taught that it's predictable and not just chaos at work. And they need a strategy for managing it. Okay. So just some final thoughts about the lessons in this chapter. And let me do something real fast. I'm gonna let Sam know she should be coming up. Okay. It's important that we offer clarity about the advanced code. You need to watch your language very carefully as you present the lesson plans. We strive to be accurate and concrete when we're talking about words. We're able to teach the entire code without using terms like silent letters, long, short vowels, magic E's, rule breakers, open and closed syllables, etc. All these terms that are just all talking about the fact that how sounds and sound pictures work, right? Trying to explain why they do what they do. Without all that terminology, right? We're going to work with the same things, right? We're going to teach them how to manage all of those, but we're not going to use the terminology. And without all that noise, they can just focus on learning the name of the sound pictures as they encounter them, right? Moving through the lessons, you want to aim to present about one sound a week and do a lesson, right? A few times that week as you work. And as with all the lessons in this book, and as well as reading books right now with your child, don't allow them to do the lessons alone. You need to be there to make sure they're saying the sounds aloud, they're not using letter names, and that they're reading the words correctly. And one last part of the chapter before we look at the lessons themselves, you'll find the sound charts on page 213. I've got a copy here too. These are so great to look at. There's a box for every phoneme, and then the various ways we spell that sound regularly. These are for the charts there for your reference. I have mine out on the desk a lot as I work with students. The one you'll see in the book I'm working with is the US version. There is a UK version, a different chart for the UK, and the UK version of Reading Reflex. But even so, English is spoken so differently all around the world. Even in the same country, it's spoken differently. So some things are going to be close, but don't quite match your dialect. But don't worry, children approximate language quite well. I've had a few students through the years that were bothered by little discrepancies, like in caught, they hear aw, which is not ah to them. I caught the ball, and they couldn't find aw on the list. So we penciled things in the boxes that matched their pronunciation, and they were fine. So as you get more comfortable with things, I think you'll get more comfortable with seeing where you might pencil something in when you have a student with a different dialect. Another note, those sound pictures are listed in order of frequency in the boxes. So some of the bottoms are quite rare. And they're just there for your reference. Don't feel like they need to be presented to every child. All right, so we're going to turn to the lessons in a second. And oh, let me see what time it is. I haven't been watching. It's 5:10 already. My goodness. So we're not going to go through many of the lessons at the beginning, but just a few to get you going. Okay. We're going to start with more word building, but it's going to be done with advanced code sound pictures now. There are 4 word lists at the beginning with common consonant sound pictures. You'll choose a sound. You're going to build the words and do the practicing common consonant sound pictures lesson with that sound. And then when appropriate, if the student's doing just fine with those, then move on to the next list and do the same thing. When those 4 lists are done, you're going to read some stories with those sound pictures. Okay. So that's kind of like the first little introduction to the advanced code. And then after that, you're going to move into the next set of lessons in the chapter, the ones starting with mapping and sorting. And that's probably where we'll start next week, right? We'll start looking at those and really tackling that idea and showing you how all the complex lessons in this chapter will work together. Okay. So with Samantha, I'm going to show you that beginning of the advanced code. Samantha, coming back up. Let me swap this now. Stop sharing. And I think we can see it. All right, can you see, Sam? Okay. So the very first lesson in the advanced code chapter is word building on page 215. And the first list is sh. So those are the ones that I'm going to be doing with her. And say, all right, so we're going to read some words or spell some words that have sh in them. Okay. So we're going to build ship. What do you hear here in ship? Shh, exactly. And if she had never seen it before, I could just tell her, that's shh. Why don't you bring it in?
Shh.
Beautiful, let's read it.
Ship. Shh. Ship.
And then I could have her map it on her paper, right? Now, Samantha, when you get to the sh sound, there's more than one letter there, isn't there? So be sure to say shh the whole time you write it. It takes a little practice.
Ship.
You've got it. Nice job. Back that sh well. And you would just keep building. There aren't many words to build here, so it won't take long. Sam's shutting the door. All right, we're going to build the word dish. What's the first sound you hear in dish? D. Okay, bring in your d.
Sh. Dish.
Let's read it.
Dish.
All right, map it out. Let's hear those sounds the whole time you're writing them. And that is how we would do the word building. The next activity to do in the advanced code is to then do, wait, write it down. I want to get the name so you don't get confused. It's practicing common consonant sound pictures, which is on page 225, right? And that's where you will read a list of words like the ones you just built. All right, so let's read this one. What do we have here?
Ship.
Great.
Shot. Dish. Shop. Wish. Shin.
Great. Oh, no, that's a different list. So great job. So we're reading them, right? And with a student like Samantha, we'd be ready to go on to the next word list, which would be for learning. And there's one for ch, and there's one for learning this sound picture of k, where that's a single sound. Right? And once you've built and read those words, then there are little stories for the younger kids, right, that have these all mixed together so they can now practice reading those advanced code words right in the midst of everything else. So I'll have Sam read the first line.
J, ack, ran,
Oh, we got to put that together though. What do we have?
ack, jack, ran,
Now you said ran.
j, ack, jack, at, ran, and at.
That wouldn't have that one. Let's make sure to get that one in there.
Fast, fast.
Great, you read Jack Rat ran fast. Okay. So of course it's perfectly fine to recap what she read if she's going to be losing the meaning as you go, right? All right, so that is the very first introduction to the advanced code. After that lesson, things start to get complicated. We're not going to see it today because I know that we need to get to our question and answer time. Sorry, Samantha's over here gesturing to me. I'm trying to understand what she's saying. Yeah, I think we're done, Sam. Thank you so much for coming. And then next week, it's going to get even more interesting. So next week, we'll look at the mapping and sorting lesson, which is on page 227. And that's where we're going to look at a sound like O with lots of spellings and start organizing that. And using the same approach to sounds and sound pictures, right? And mapping out sounds in a careful logic, though, to help her get the idea that sounds can be shown in many ways. Samantha, the real student, already understands that, but organizing that information, I think, is what could help her. So we'll be showing her an organization to try to make this information easily accessible when she wants to spell. Okay, so let me see if there's anything else I wanted to cover. We have a few assignments for next week. Let me go over those really quickly. Need to share my screen again. Here we go. So for next time, which is March 1st, we are going to continue chapter 5 and we'll finish it up. And we will get a start on chapter 6, which is where we look at multisyllable management. And I think most of your students may not be ready quite for that chapter yet, but seeing me and Samantha do the lessons, I think will be helpful for when they are ready. So before we meet next week, you'll want to cut up the puzzles and organize them in your envelopes and in your box so that you'll be ready to do your lessons. And if your child is segmenting and blending enough with the words in chapter 3, then do all the lessons in chapter 4 with the first word list at least. And keep moving ahead. And if you can, get a start on all the lessons in chapter 5. You can do just the ones that Samantha and I did. And then we'll pick up the rest from there. Okay. So that was what I had organized for today. I think it's time we go to questions.
We didn't have too many. We had, I see the EAR list. How would you approach EAR in fear?
So remember when I said we were going to segment to the phoneme level, but things get complicated when we start looking at words because of overlap, because we have sound pictures that are used for different sounds, right? So here's one of those where we're encountering that. So let's start with the word fear and what we hear in it. That's the first thing, the speech, right? If we're going speech to print. Fear is 3 sounds. What are they? Whose question was this? Oh, it's Nora. She's probably gone, huh?
No, I think she's here.
Oh, she's here. So what are the sounds we hear in fear? We hear E
E,
and R, right? So we have 3 sounds. E, R. So if I do this here, can you see it? We've got F is pretty easy. E, well, we use this to represent the E sound quite a bit, don't we?
Mhm.
And then we have And I think what's confusing is, if you look, was she looking at the chart maybe? Was she seeing that if you look over on the box on the chart, you're going to see a lot of ways to spell and included among them is this, right? It's like, oh, but we need to be careful. This, in this case, is being shown as a representation of the sound There is no sound in fear, or that would be right? What this one is showing is a word like earth. What's the first sound in earth? And this is the representation of And then, right? And this is the So the confusing thing, right? The part that makes it all challenging for us all is that this string of letters, right, is used to represent completely different things, 2 different things. It's overlap, right, of a certain kind. It's used to represent 2 sounds in words like fear, right? And it's used to represent 1 sound in words like earth. And
I think what's confusing to me is when I was trained OG, they keep the chunks and then they tell you EAR, ear. So in doing this phonographics, you kind of have to go back and realize that E and is 2 sounds. Kind of like you say R is not vowel R, right?
Exactly.
So
exactly.
It's relearning all that.
Yeah, we're going to have a lot of relearning to do, and maybe learning for the first time. I think most of us never really picked words apart this way. And when we first started to pick words apart was maybe when we started to teach phonics, right? And then in phonics, they were telling us to leave all these things together and that they were all the same thing. I'll see them give kids lists and say, these all have the same sound, and there'll be a mixture of things that are different sounds. That happens especially, I think, with like this one. They'll give kids a list of words with this in it, right? And say, oh, these have the same sound. And they'll have food in there, and they'll have cook in there. Oop. But in food, that's oo. And in cook, that same thing is They're completely separate sounds, right? But that's the confusion of phonics, because they start with letters and they have some rules about what these letters are doing, right? And they aren't attending carefully enough to the sound level. All right, let's see if there were other questions. I'm seeing a student, someone said, that is in 3rd grade, but reading on a 1st grade level. Is there an assessment to help me determine where I should begin this instruction with her? It sounds like you might have missed some of the sessions. Is that right, Brenda? Are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah, I missed part of the first session. So
Oh, okay. Yeah, in the first session we did look at the assessment that there is. So we do start in the book. There's an assessment that you give so you can see what the student knows and what the student doesn't know. Okay. And so you can give the student that. And all the sessions have been recorded, so you could go back and look at that too.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you.
Sure. And then in that same meeting, I think we talked about the fact that even though students may not really have issues until a little later, in the chapters, we still take them through everything. We'll just do
Okay.
it quickly as an introduction. And we
Right.
might talk about the fact you know how to read these words, but we're going to be working with them in a whole different way and working with their sounds. So let's practice these simpler words. And then we're going to work up to the ones that, you know, are going to be harder.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Mhm.
Any other questions?
Nope, I'm not seeing any.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any either. So let me ask a question then, because we have 5 more minutes, right? I can't believe I finished in time. Well, I didn't because I skipped some things that we'll do next week. Who, with a show of hands or some other way, who all got a chance to do the chapter 3 lessons? Yeah? Good. We're seeing some thumbs up. People showing different ways. How did they go? Maybe type in or let me know.
Oh, Kimberly raised her hand. Kimberly, do you have a question? Or are you just saying, yes, you did it?
I think she's saying she did it, right?
Yeah. Normally there's a thumbs up, but that's okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's all this etiquette to learn of Zoom that I don't know either. I'm glad we're getting to know these things.
Funny.
How about somebody who was brave? Could tell me how it went.
Oh, my kids at school, Tanya said, my kids at school love the lessons.
Oh, good, good. What grade are they?
I'm Montessori, so I had 1st through 3rd, but I generally did those chapter 3 ones with my 1st graders.
Mm-hmm. Great.
And they wanted to keep going.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because we have a curriculum in place, but it really matches what you're telling us pretty well.
Mhm.
So I'm just kind of adding these lessons in as supplements. And yeah, like I said, they really love it. I teach Montessori, so we have what are called movable alphabets.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of you know, copying the pages and cutting out the pieces and all of that, I just use our movable alphabet, and they move the letters, and they loved it.
Yeah. I don't know if you know this, but the authors of Reading Reflex, Carmen and Jeffrey McGinnis, Carmen at least is a Montessori teacher.
You could tell there is a lot. Yeah. You could really tell. And I loved it because at the beginning, instead of me laying out the letters, I asked them to, I gave the sound, and then they had to pick out the letter from the entire alphabet and place them up top. So we were doing some different things like that, but
yeah,
they really enjoyed it. So that's interesting. So did you say the author of this?
Yeah, the author of Reading Reflex, Carmen McGinnis, is a Montessori teacher. So she had looked at how Montessori taught reading, and it was great, but it was for Italian.
Right. So we really didn't have a curriculum until about 4 years ago. I mean, we used all of the materials that Montessori uses, but we didn't have a scope and sequence. It was really out of control, chaotic. And so we did just within 4 years have picked up a new curriculum. That's really, I'm so happy because we worked really hard to find this curriculum, and it's matching the science of reading and the different things that I've been learning. So
beautiful. Yeah. Let me know how it goes when we get to chapter 5.
Yes, that's the one I'm interested in, because I'll be doing that.
Yeah.
I'll be doing that with my 2nd and my 3rd. My 3rd should already be there, but I just did the sorting one though. Isn't that chapter 5?
Yeah, it is.
I may have put my own little Montessori spin on it, but I basically did the sorting one with AI or with the A's, the long A's. So
yeah, it'll be interesting. And your movable alphabet might become less useful then, because we would really want the child seeing in a sound picture that's the entire unit. Yeah.
Yes. So
I have I on one card.
Yes, I have an aid working on creating those for us.
Perfect.
Because you can't purchase that. It's all just the basic code in our movable alphabet.
Yeah, in the Montessori thing.
And what I did though, I explained that all to the kids, and I had like the AI together touching. Whenever we did it, we moved it down as one sound picture.
Great way to do that.
Instead of the two letters. So
That's a great way to do that. Some people take their little like magnetic letters, for example, for people who have those, and they will glue them, physically glue them,
yeah.
right? Just buy a bunch so you can glue a bunch
And
together.
that's almost something I could do with my older movable alphabet. I would only need to, do all the sound pictures, but I don't feel like I'd be using all that many letters for my movable alphabet. So I could always think about doing something like that too.
Yeah, at least for a few or something, just to do some word building with. Someone wanted to know what curriculum it is that you picked, Tanya.
Oh, it's called Project Read. So it has a lot of movement base. It doesn't call it sound pictures or anything like that. There's not the whole the mapping, orthographic mapping, but there is a lot of different aspects that you have talked about that go with it. Go with Project Read completely. So I highly recommend it. It's a great curriculum.
Good.
Well, Erin, I have been using this method with my little boy that couldn't remember the names of the letters.
Right. I remember we talked about that. How did it going?
Wonderful. His mom thinks I now walk on water. Because he has learned probably 6 or 8 of the sounds. We don't ever say the word letter. And he can't tell me the name of them, but he can point to it and tell me the sound. And so we have read 2 of the little books at the sentence strips at the end. It's amazing. Fantastic.
Yeah. And for him to see himself reading, that's just going to build, right?
Well, yeah. And because I said to him after he read the first little booklet thing, I said, "You are a reader." And he just looked at me and he said, "I am?" Yeah, buddy, look, you just read this, because I turned it into a little booklet for him to carry around, and he put it in his pocket, and he was so proud because he was a reader.
Oh, so well, I'm proud of you both, Brenda. That's great.
Well, thank you.
Okay, I think we're done. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Erin.
You're welcome. Oh, and I just want to say, I said last time that when we get to chapter 5, that's where things are going to get really interesting. Well, it's chapter 5 next week where things will get really interesting.
Okay.
Because so far it doesn't look too different maybe from what everybody's been doing with building words and things. So
I think that's true. Yeah, but I'm looking forward to next week.
Yeah, me too.
Okie doke. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Next week.